Dinner is very good, isn't it? Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this presentation. I'm going to try to keep it, relatively straightforward, and I'm going to have questions at the end. And get us out of here to see the Ten Commandments, because we can't keep Mr. Janelle waiting. So I would just like to start, before I start with the presentation. I've answered this question a couple of times already tonight about what appealed to me about Marion Davies as a subject. And the way that I usually answer that is that Marion was sort of in my mind from the time when I was a kid. So I've always been into classic film and sound film. When I was about 13, I received a book called The Times We Had, which has for years been marketed as Marion Davies' memoir. And she always stuck in my mind as somebody who had a really interesting life and didn't have a whole lot written about her. So fast forward a few years, and I started a classic film blog and started doing some research and writing projects, and I realized how much I loved it. And started thinking of the possibility perhaps of doing something bigger, and thought, who's really interesting, who doesn't have a lot written about them? And Marion Davies came right to mind. Couldn't shake her. She was hanging on, and I thought, okay, well, I'll take this as a sign. Found her papers, her letters, her materials at the Margaret Herrick Library at the Academy in LA, and went through them, and these started coming together. The more I learned, the more it became clear that Marion really needed to be given her voice back. She has been considered for decades to be the appendage to William Randolph Hearst, the publishing tycoon who was her romantic partner and her boss at Cosmopolitan Productions. And she was really her own woman. She had a lot of agency. She negotiated her own contracts. She was, in her words, she was the captain of her soul. And that's where the title of my book comes from. Something that Marion said about herself. She said, Hearst wanted me to be what he wanted me to be, and I am the captain of my soul. And what I want to do myself, regardless of what other people think that I should do. And it comes from the poem Invictus by William Ernest Henley. You may be familiar with it. I'm the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul. And it really fits Marion a lot. So, one thing that surprised me about her life was how literary it was. There are some things that happened in her life that just, if I tried to make it up for a novel, it would have been too much. It's just so incredible how the arc of her life was like a book. So let me start with her childhood now. Here's the moment of truth. Let's see if this works. So her childhood. This is Marion and her sister Rose. This is probably around 1902 or 1903. She was born January 3rd, 1897. And her sister Rose was 18 months older. And they were very close. She was one of 5. Her brother died young. Her brother died young in a tragic boating accident when he was 11. So these are her sisters. Renee, the eldest, this is her mom, Rose, her sister Ethel, and her sister Rose. And the father essentially left the family after the brother died. He couldn't handle it. And Mama Rose, they called her, really raised the girls alone. They all went into show business, all 4 of them. And Mama Rose saw the stage as a way for the girls to sort of get out of Brooklyn, to get out of this sort of lower middle class life that they were living in, and marry somebody who could support them. Marion, this is Marion's school, by the way, PS 93, in Brooklyn. And she was a very bright child, charming, charismatic, but she had a pretty bad stutter, and she was bullied for it by the kids and the teachers. She was made to get up in front of the class and recite. They knew that she wouldn't be able to get through it, and it was really, really bad for her. But she got into it to take her mind off her problems. She got into sewing. quilting and embroidery and books. She was a voracious reader and got really into the books of Dickens. So I have sort of a special treat. I probably won't pass it around just because everybody's eating, but...
That's not a good idea.
No, this is Marion's embroidery.
You can come up and see it afterwards, maybe. But this is something that Marion did. I would say probably in the 30s or 40s. And if you're familiar with embroidery, it also has a really beautiful back. So yeah, you can come up and see it afterwards if you're interested.
But that was one of the ways that she coped with her childhood. Finally, Marion convinced her mom to let her leave school young, because she was just having a hard time. And she joined the chorus, like her sisters. This is the first time that Marion saw her name in the program. This is a show called Chin Chin. And these are just her chorus children, none of them became particularly famous. But in the chorus, she started going out with a guy named Paul Block, who, if you're familiar with Toledo, Ohio, and the newspaper communications industry in Toledo, Ohio, Block Communications Inc. is still around, and that's Paul Block. So he saw in her this charm and charisma that had been successful, had proven successful in the early movie celebrity world. The movie stars were very new at this point, and Mary Pickford had exuded the same sort of charm and charisma that Marion had. So Paul Block felt that Marion would make a good movie star. So he went to his friend. He was in advertising at this point. He knew William Randolph Hearst. He went to his friend Hearst and asked him if he would be able to finance Marion Davies' first film. And Hearst, who had been doing movies as a supplement to his newspaper business for a while, said no. He didn't want to do that. It was too big of a risk. Marion didn't have any experience. So Paul Block financed this movie himself, this movie called Runaway Romany. And Hearst was invited to see the movie. Paul Block, said, you should really come see this movie. He didn't want to back it, but you should really come see it. So Hearst went to see the movie, and he fell in love with Marion Davies on screen. He saw her in this, cinematic glow, this beautiful, young, sort of angelic creature that he really took to. So he comes out of the screening and he goes to Paul Block and says, I would really like to be introduced to Marion Davies. They had met before this, very briefly, in parties and things like that, but she, up to this point, was Paul Block's girl, and he didn't do anything about it. So it was really on the screen that he fell in love with Marion. This is Runaway Romany. So the plot is that Marion is a young Roma girl who, or a young, actually I think it's, the movie's lost, so we don't actually know a whole lot, but I think a non-Roma gets kidnapped and then she gets returned anyway. But you see, she is 20 years old at this point, and I have some stories in the book about Runaway Romany and the filming of it. There's some pretty good stories about the filming of this movie. William Randolph Hearst was born into wealth in San Francisco. His father had made money in the Comstock Lode and owned the San Francisco Examiner. Hearst was what they call rusticated from Harvard. He wasn't focused on his studies, and he had just dropped out. He was somewhat suspended or expelled from Harvard, and he took over his father's newspaper business. That was really what he was interested in. He had a one-track mind, and so he took over the Examiner. By 1898, he had recognized the power of visual media to supplement newspaper sales, and he sent cameras down to Cuba to film the Spanish-American War for newsreels. And so he was a very early visionary, we could say, of the power of visual media. He was married. He married a woman named Millicent Wilson, Kate Millicent Hurst, in 1903. And there were problems with that marriage from the start. She was high society. She really enjoyed being in that sort of creme de la creme New York society, and he didn't. He was much more down to earth. And Marion was a breath of fresh air for him. He was essentially separated from his wife by the time that Marion came along, and they became a couple. First signed Marion to Cosmopolitan Productions. It was a newly incorporated studio that Hearst was trying out. And he poured a lot of money into Marion Davies' production because of what he saw in Runaway Romany. He saw that she had a lot of potential, so he wanted to make her into a star. He wanted to show the public what he saw in her, what he had seen in Runaway Romany, as this ethereal, almost saintly woman. But Marion was a natural comedian, and she infused that into her roles. You saw that today in Little Old New York, right? I mean, she was so funny, and she did that all throughout her early career with Hearst. And a lot of her early movies were filmed, at least the exteriors, were filmed in California. By 1919, Hearst and Marion were an established couple. And San Simeon, Hearst Castle, if anybody's been to Hearst Castle? Oh, that's cool, yeah, great. So Hearst Castle was started in 1919, so it sort of runs parallel to his relationship with Marion. And he wanted Marion to be near him when he was in California. So he brought her out, and these scenes, this is Carmel. This is Carmel, this is Point Lobos in California, because he wanted Marion to not be in New York. He missed her too much, so he wanted to be able to come see her and have her come down to LA. So a lot of these early movies, you'll see these exteriors that are in California because of the building of Hearst Castle. Here's Little Old New York, a little bit about Little Old New York that we saw today. We saw, if you were here, you saw Little Old New York, you saw this photo that I put in the PowerPoint. This is Cosmopolitan Productions at the corner of 126th, 127th Street and 2nd Avenue in Harlem. And there was a really bad fire during the filming of Little Old New York toward the end. If you were here during the movie, I told the story in the movie, for those of you who were not. This fire destroyed the entire set of Little Old New York, everything. The scenery, the costumes, it was all gone. And fortunately for us, the film canisters weren't unharmed. They were in a different part of the building, and the fire didn't reach that part of the building. So Little Old New York survives today because the fire didn't reach the film cans, and nothing had to be reshot. So this incident gave Hearst the idea that either he was going to have to rebuild, or they were going to have to move to California or move somewhere else, right? And it was clear that the future of the film industry was in California by this point, so they decided instead of rebuilding, they're going to move to California. So Cosmopolitan Productions moved to California. There's the footage of the fire, or the picture of the fire, right? You see everything got destroyed. And so they moved to California, and here's Marion signing her first contract with Irving Thalberg, her first contract with MGM. So the way it worked was that Cosmopolitan moved to California and essentially merged. It wasn't a true merger, but it was essentially Cosmopolitan would make movies that would be distributed by MGM, and then MGM would get the Hearst publicity. So it was a really good deal for both parties. So Marion got her own MGM contract that she signed in 1925. After she got this new contract, well, actually I should say in her new contract, there were clauses that allowed Marion to have more oversight over her own roles. So Marion, as we saw earlier in Rules of New York, always wanted to be a comedian, was a natural comedian. And so she fought for her comedy. She went to Irving Thalberg. She said, I would like, by the way, Irving Thalberg is the head of production at MGM. We should probably find that out. So she went to Irving Thalberg and she said, I would like to play a modern girl. Those were her words, a modern girl. And so Irving Thalberg went to Hearst and said, Marion would like to play a modern girl. And Hearst said, okay. So they tried her in the Fair Co-Ed, and then went on to the Fair Co-Ed, then went on to the Patsy. Now, normally this presentation has video clips, but unfortunately there's something going on with the internet and we can't play the clips. So I'll just tell you, you should go online and look up the Patsy if you haven't seen it. The Patsy is just absolutely, I mean, it shows Marion Davies' comedic talents better than any other film she ever made, I think. She is running, tumbling, really doing a lot of stuff that Carol Lombard did later. And then Lucille Ball took from Carol Lombard, and then Carol Burnett took from Lucille Ball. So she has this, Marion is sort of the head of this, or the pioneer of this certain type of comedy that became standard. So yes, if you look at the Patsy, she does similar things in Show People as well, and she's an exceptionally gifted comedian. This was always a tough one. There we go. I want to talk a little bit about Marion's transition to sound, because we talked about her stutter, right, which stayed with her throughout her life. After The Jazz Singer came out, The Jazz Singer was, a movie that was the first instance of synchronized dialogue on film. Marion was on her guard. She didn't quite know what was going to be the future of sound on film, but she knew that her stutter threatened to ruin her if it became standard. What she said about it on her autobiographical tapes, she said, I didn't want to go back. I wish that the earth would open up because I said I cannot do sound pictures. But she had a contract. She had to figure out a way to continue on. She worked exceptionally hard on her lines for hours every night, and she never stuttered on screen. I have her schedule from the early 1930s when she was just getting used to sound, and she would be at the studio all day, she would come home, she would eat a quick dinner, and then for the rest of the night, she would work on her lines. It worked for her. She was just a really, really, really hard worker. She was making $10,000 a week in 1925. That was what her contract said. So she had her own money. That's an important thing to note. So she got $1 million together in less than 48 hours, and she gave it to Hearst. And that, she wanted it to be a gift. The Hearst Corporation wouldn't accept a gift. It had to be a loan. But that amount of money and two other gifts of similar amounts are credited with the fact that the Hearst Corporation still exists today. And Hearst was grateful to her for the rest of his life and tried to make it up to her. The way he tried to make it up to her was to try to get a divorce, right? Finally, from his wife. But there's a story in the book, I don't want to give it away here, but there's a story in the book about how that almost happened. But it ultimately fell through, and it broke Marion's heart. They were deeply in love. They were deeply in love. The death of Hearst in 1951 was a really, really horrible time for Marion. She missed him for the rest of her life. She ultimately married She married a man, a merchant marine captain named Horace Brown, who looked very much like Hearst. And it was a really unhappy marriage. So she had a hard time. She had a hard time after Hearst died. Marion was a very political person, she had a lot of causes that were really close to her heart. One of them was animal rights. She was an early proponent of stopping animal testing, like animal testing for medical issues and medicine. So she got Hearst on board as well. Marion and Irene Castle were the two sort of big early people for anti-vivisection. And this is her dog Gandhi, by the way. This is her little dachshund who she adored. She rescued him from a hotel in Germany where he had been left, and as collateral. And the owner had never returned to pay the bill, so she paid the owner's bill and rescued the dog. So one thing that she says about her, animal rights activism, about her, her position against animal testing was that they should discover an easier way, because I wouldn't want to be found down like that and having to cut me open, and even if I were a rat. So that it shows who she was, and how sort of empathetic she was to people and also to animals. Davies Children's Clinic. It was founded in 1926, and in 1927 it completed its first round of active work. What it did was it provided 100% free medical care to low-income children in West Los Angeles. West Los Angeles at this point was a very poor neighborhood, and it was made up mostly of Mexican and Japanese immigrant families. So there was, there's a lot of poverty because a lot of those families couldn't get the same jobs that the white families in the area could get, and they didn't have access to the medical care that the other families had. So Marion saw this need, built this clinic, and these children got free medical care. This is Marion at the JFK inauguration. The story behind it is that Marion had been friends with JFK's father, Joseph B. Kennedy, from her Hollywood years. And when the Democratic National Convention was coming to Los Angeles, Marion volunteered her home as a headquarters for the DNC. So Joseph B. Kennedy operated from her home. It was not safe enough for JFK to be in, but Joseph B. Kennedy operated there. And as a thank you, she and Horace, her husband, who's over here, you can't really see him, but they were invited to the inauguration, and they sat with the family. So it's really cool. You can see like all these figures, right? I mean, there's Eisenhower and OJ and Nixon, and there's Marion Davies. So anyway, that's what I got, and I want to leave it open for questions. So if anybody has any questions that they would like to ask.